Hi, in this training video, we're going to be covering stockpiled materials. We'll go over how to create a stockpile, add transactions to the stockpile for the materials that's been added to our job, and manage our stockpile during the job course of our project. So to get started, log into AWP. From your dashboard, we need to navigate to our contract progress overview, search for the contract that you need to work on. Go ahead and open the progress summary. Once you're on the contract progress summary screen, up in the quick links, there will be a link called construction stockpile. Go ahead and click on that link. This will open the stockpile overview page. This will show a list of all the stockpiles that are created for that specific contract. To add a new stockpile, there's a gray button here. Go ahead and click on the gray button. Add a description. In our example for training here, we're going to be stockpiling light poles. Use the item search box here to pick your contract item that you're stockpiling the material for. And then the recovery date is just the current date that you're creating this stockpile. Essentially, this is going to tell the system when to start using the stockpile for pay estimates. We want that to start happening immediately after creating the stockpile, so just enter the date that you create the stockpile. Once you have the three fields filled out, go ahead and click the Save button. And now we're on our summary for our stockpile. There's material information on the left you can fill out as you see fit for the material that's being stockpiled. And then on the right columns here, we have some calculated totals and amounts, and we'll see those adjust as we impact our stockpile through transactions. So to start adding the material that's been stockpiled on your job, at the bottom is our transactions. The system will initially create the first row for you. If you need to add additional ones, click the new button, and we'll cover that in a little bit. The comments field's required, so just enter something that's appropriate. And the invoice number, just enter the invoice number that you received from the contractor and the date that's shown on the invoice. The transaction date is just simply the date that you're creating this transaction, so current date. Transaction type, invoice or replenish, and then enter the quantity that's represented on the invoice if it's there. In this example, we're going to assume that they stockpiled 4 light poles. And then below the gray bar down here, go ahead and pick the project item and category from the drop down. Typically there's only going to be one, so it should be pretty easy. And then the stockpile amount is simply the amount shown on the invoice for the material being stockpiled. In our case here, we're going to assume it cost the contractor $1,000 for each light pole. They stockpiled 4, so our invoice amount is $4,000. So once you have those filled in, the next item that we need to take a look at is this item recovery percentage. Essentially what this field is telling the system is at what point does the balance for the stockpile need to be 0. So essentially it's how much material stockpiled, what percentage of the total is that. In our example, it's not shown on the screen here, but we have a total of 10 light poles on this job. We're stockpiling 4, so 4 divided by 10 is 40%. So if we used all the stockpiled material, in our example, all 4 light poles, we'll have completed 40% of the work. There are a number of examples on our quick reference guide page with how to come up with this item recovery percentage. In our example here with light poles, it's pretty straightforward. 4 out of 10 is 40%. If you're stockpiling aggregate and you have some conversion factors to get from tons to cubic yards needed, there'll be some math in there. But again, there's examples shown in our quick reference guide page. So once that's been updated, just hit save. So now we'll see our stockpile amounts 4,000. That's a running total of all the transaction amounts shown down here. Our balance, essentially what our stockpile amount is minus our total recovery amount. These recovery amounts is what's are withheld from pay estimates, recovered from our stockpiled material that's been paid. So they'll update as the material gets withheld from pay estimates. So again, our balance is this stockpile amount minus total recovery amount. Current extended amount, just our contract item amount for the item that we've selected over here. So now if the contractor comes back, stockpiles additional material for this item, we don't need to create an entirely new item. We can just replenish the stockpile by adding additional transactions here at the bottom. Just hit the new button here. It'll create a new transaction row. Again, enter in an appropriate comment here. Enter the invoice number that you received from the contractor, the date of the invoice. Again, the transaction date is just the date that you're entering this transaction. You can pick a type here. We're going to assume we got invoiced again for another 4 light poles. If you need to enter in some additional information about the invoice, you can here in the description field. Again, pick the project item and category from the drop down. 4,000 is our amount shown on our stockpile, $1,000 per light pole, 4 light poles. Now that we have 8 total light poles that have been stockpiled, we need to update our recovery percentage. So 8 out of the 10 total needed is 80%. So once we've installed all 8 light poles, we'll have completed 80% of the work for this item. Even if at some point they installed some or all of the initial 4 light poles that were stockpiled, we'll still need to update this to 80. If they installed 2 out of the initial one and then stockpiled an additional 4, our running total is still 8 or 80%. So once it's all used up, will constitute 80% of the work. You need to update the recovery percentage to reflect that running total. Once those changes have been made, go ahead and hit save. From this page, if you need to add a new stockpile for another material, you can use the component action button here by save and hit new from here. If you need to navigate back to the overview, the quick link up at the top here that says construction stockpile overview will take you back to the overview page for stockpiles on this contract. So here we have our 1 stockpile we created. Again, additional stockpiled materials will show down here. The ID is our link to open a stockpile. It's just a sequential number starting at 1 for each stockpile that gets created in the system for this contract. You can also use the gray button here to add additional ones if you're on this page. If you need to make additional changes to an existing stockpile, just use the ID here, click on it, and you can come back in. Maybe we need to add an additional transaction. They stockpiled more material. Again, comments are required. Enter the invoice number, the date on the invoice. Transaction date is just today's date. Pick a type. They ended up stockpiling the remaining 2 light poles. Pick our project item and category. Our invoice amount is $2,000. So now all of the light poles that are needed on the job are stockpiled. Our recovery percent is 100. Once we've depleted all the stockpiles, we'll have completed 100% of the work for this item. So that covers how to create a stockpile, add transaction in order to add the material for the stockpile and impact the amount and balance of our stockpile, and then how to add additional ones if needed.